you don't just ask questions, but sometimes you have to coach the students. So you get a kid, for example, who gets an idea in his head, and you let him take it down the rabbit hole, you might not ever be able to pull it up because
So true.
kids get attached to their well-voiced and what they think is highly developed position.
Welcome to School Sisters, where we are cultivating the maximum number of thinking moms we can. This is the podcast for classical homeschooling mamas who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. School Sisters discusses topics that matter to those of us who believe that educating ourselves through reading widely, thinking deeply, and applying faithfully equips us for the task of educating our children. I'm your host, Brandy Wenzel. To get my free, almost weekly, mostly Charlotte Mason newsletter, go to afterthoughtsblog.net/subscribe and sign up. My co-host today is Mystie Winkler. Mystie is a homeschooling mom of 5, including 2 graduates. She writes and podcasts at simplyconvivial.com and is the author of 2 excellent books, The Convivial Homeschool and Simplified Organization. Our guest today is Andrew Zwerneman. Andrew serves as president and master teacher at Cana Academy. For 40 years, he has taught and consulted in secondary schools that emphasize classic humanities. For 19 years, he headed schools himself, 2 at the public charter school Tempe Preparatory Academy in Tempe, Arizona, 17 at Trinity School at Meadow View in Falls Church, Virginia. Andrew has degrees from both Notre Dame and St. John's University, and he has authored 2 books, History, Forgotten and Remembered, and The Life We Have Together, A Case for Humane Studies, A Vision for Renewal. We are pleased to announce that registration for our annual spring training sessions is now open. In fact, one reason why we asked Andrew to be here today is because we hired him as this year's coach. Andrew is going to teach 2 sessions on history as a classical subject. The first session will help us get away from Marxism and adopt a classical view of history. The second session will offer us a method for teaching history. To register, just go to scolesisters.com/history to sign up. That's scolesisters.com/history. In today's episode, we're peppering Andrew with questions about seminar-style teaching, what it is, where it comes from, how it fits into the classical tradition, and more. You're going to love this conversation. And so, without further ado, let's get to it. Let's start off with our School A every day. Mystie, why don't you go first and show us how it is done?
Okay. Well, I'm bringing a book I've finished.
Good job.
So I feel very pleased with myself. But I finished it because it was a local book club pick. So my book club that's reading like great books kind of chronologically is in the 16th century this year. But we're starting back a little bit earlier than that just because of where we, the months ran out. So we started this year with Le Morte d'Arthur by Mallory. And I didn't realize before we started that my copy is greatly abridged.
Oh no.
So I have a little Signet classic. And so I'm the one picking the books, right? So I look at my shelf. I've read this before. I'm like, oh yeah, it's kind of long, but it's not that bad. And it turns out that my edition is like half of Mallory.
Oh no.
And the original is like 40 hours. But we made it through. Different people read different versions. And that was fine. We don't all read the exact same thing all the time. It's harder with some of these older books. Yeah, we're going to read Spenser next,
Ooh.
The Fairy Queen. We're going to read book 1 and 2. And I think that's a little bit more along the lines of what people expect with King Arthur and chivalry and all of that.
Yes.
We read Dante last year, and we're talking about the idea of courtly love and all of that. And Mallory, the love and romance portrayed in Mallory is not ethereal and courtly by any stretch of the imagination.
Interesting.
And it turns out, you get the picture from Spenser, like, okay, Una is out. She's this lone maiden riding, trying to find her knight. But it turns out, like, according to Mallory, like, they're just girls on horses all over the place. You can't go down into the forest at all without coming across some lady or other who's looking for a knight to do something for her. And all the knights are out seeking adventure and finding women, and women are throwing themselves at men and getting what it's quite a tale, quite a collection of episodic tales. So it wasn't what a lot of our ladies were expecting, but it was interesting just to see the history, I guess, of the Arthurian tales. And, Mallory was pulling together many different sources. And now most of us are curious about where the more Victorian, maybe, definitions of chivalry and all of that come from, because it wasn't really in Mallory.
So interesting. I don't think I've read anything about Arthur that is that old. I think, it's just like all the retellings and.
Right. Yes, the children's versions it's the same stories, but they are definitely children's versions.
Yeah. Interesting. I'll have to read it sometime. Now you make me want to, even though it sounds really racy. Well, Andrew, what about you? What do you have for us? What have you been reading?
Well, I recently reread one of my favorite novels, and it's an American classic. It's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain.
Nice.
I reread it because we wanted to do a video in our series called Best Books. Mm-hmm. It is one of the best books. In fact, Ernest Hemingway thinks that Huckleberry Finn is kind of the foundation for all subsequent American novels of any note. That may be a point of controversy. T.S. Eliot thought it was a masterpiece. Those are pretty good accolades to big gun writers. I love Huckleberry Finn. I love the scope of the story, spiritually and geographically. Geographically, it spans the Mississippi, and along the Mississippi, you've got the body of water that the river is, and then you got all the towns along the way, and the story hovers around the tension between those two geographic spaces. The river's kind of a place that's idyllic. It's almost, pre-lapsarian. And it's where Huck, a young white man, maybe somewhere between a boy and a man, certainly a young man, and a much older black man who's old enough to be his father, become friends. It's an unlikely story. It's a remarkable story for that. But the river is the space that Mark Twain gives them to forge their friendship, to complete their odyssey. And there's a lot of growth along the way that each of the characters goes through. The towns, however, end up being sources of tumults, of moral, social, and spiritual tumult. There, evil pops out of the towns, a lot of deceit, violence. So it's an interesting contrast that's set up between the two. I love the story for that. I also love the story, Mark Twain's description of the world of Huckleberry Finn and Jim and the other characters is it's a fallen world, and that particular world is steeped in slave culture, and you hear the incendiary N-word come up, and it's alarming, and it's ugly, it's disturbing, it's divisive, it's cruel. But I think Twain did that intentionally. He put it in the mouth of Huck Finn, who ends up having a major transformation in the way he thinks about Jim, a slave, and he ends up helping Jim become a free man. About halfway through the novel, roughly, Huck lies to Jim, and when Jim catches him, he calls him trash, which, in the era in which the novel takes place, that turns social standards up on their heads. But it's a wake-up moment. It's like a slap to the moral head of Huck. And it's part of how he comes around and eventually is willing to risk his life and everything he's got for the sake of Jim. It's a very powerful story for all those reasons. Some people don't like the ending because Huck takes off for the West, and it looks like maybe a moment anticipating a sequel or something like that, or maybe a cheap shot. But I think it works because of the big place of the Odyssey that's right in the center of the novel. That is the trip down the Mississippi. Huck's not done growing up. The characters are not done changing. America's not done changing. The Mississippi still spans, at that time, still spans slave and free states. And the West holds out, at least in Huck's hope, something more that he needs to discover, something more perhaps he needs to discover about himself. And for all those reasons, I just love that book, and I commend it to everybody.
That makes me think I should read that aloud to my kids sometime soon. I haven't really thought about that book in quite a while.
It's a good read aloud book. It takes some practice because of the dialect.
Right.
You have to read it ahead of time and practice through those difficult lines. And then you probably have to stop and coach the kids a little bit about how to understand it. But that's a really good read aloud book.
I think I'll do that soon. Well, my book today that I brought here it's one it's been sitting on my shelf, but I just started it today. And actually, I started it today because I told my son that he had to choose the next read aloud book that we were going to do. And oh my goodness, there was so much drama over him making this choice because he wanted to take a poll of his sisters and make sure that his selection was approved by all. And I told him to man up and make a decision without taking a poll. And so there was a lot of anxiety over this, but he chose Flint by Louis L'Amour. Apparently he's already read it. I have not. And I'm a L'Amour fan, but oh my goodness, I loved the way that this book started out. It feels very artfully done in just the way that he introduced his character. And by the middle of the very first chapter, you already get the sense of this character's dramatic history. Like, how he started off when he was little, that he was in some sort of wagon train and the Indians killed everybody but him in this wagon train. And so then he's tossed around as an orphan just from place to place until he's finally abandoned. And then, all the way into his future, that his wife tried to have him killed and that he was very successful business-wise and that he has cancer and that he's dying. And all of this is somehow conveyed in story form in a very interesting way in just a handful of pages. I just thought,
wow,
it was just so remarkable. And so, I don't know, the last few episodes I've recorded, people have been discussing Russian novels. And I just thought, how efficient. That's so much character development and background in so few pages.
And is Flint... Louis L'Amour is known for Western novels. Is Flint a Western novel?
It is. So this man started out in the West, then he went to the East, and this is where he met with his business success and all of this. And now that he's dying, he's returning to the West. And he's actually, from what I can tell, headed to New Mexico. He seems to have this place there where he's just going to go up into this place that he knows of. And that's where he's going to spend his final days. He believes he only has, it sounds like a month left to live or something, but there's a whole book ahead of us. So apparently it's not as simple as going up into the hills and dying by yourself. So I'm curious which direction he's going to go. He's already introduced enough. He's introduced at least one character with a name where you get the sense of she's probably going to be a player in this story in some way. So I love reading L'Amour aloud to my children because, we started with Lonesome Gods, which happened to be in the setting where we were living in California at the time. Like, this was our land that he was talking about, and we knew it and it was familiar. And so to have all of this Western drama playing out in a place that they actually knew was so fun. But I've really come to appreciate him in the sense of just his ability to convey why Americans do and think the way that they do and think.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. I feel like Europeans view us as like these crazy people who are carrying guns on our belts and they just can't figure out why. And I feel like L'Amour really fills in that why and explains why we value the things we do and all of that. I'm looking forward to this book a whole lot. And like I was telling you guys before we started the recording, we recently moved and I feel like I need to do a lot more fiction this year to kind of just calm myself down as I'm making this transition. I don't feel like I have a lot of bandwidth for all the heavy nonfiction reading that I usually do. I have actually toyed with making a L'Amour just category in my reading list for this year, and maybe I'll just see how many of them I can read. So
Nice.
How old is your son?
he's 15.
15. Okay. At any point did he read Shane by Jack Schaefer?
Ooh, I don't think so. I don't think we own that one, but I'm going to write it down.
Yeah. So if you like the Westerns, I think that's a very good short novel, and it's got a good story, and it's got some very interesting characters, and would be a good read aloud and a good book for everybody in the family to talk about. Lots of things to discuss.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We read aloud a lot, and I'm always looking for the next read aloud book. Great.
Hi, Abby here to invite you to join us in Sistership. It is the place for homeschooling moms to talk about all things homeschool, educational philosophy, books, and how to avoid burnout. Sistership is private and free from ads, free from drama, and free to join. We wanted a place, no matter where we live, to find thinking mothers to discuss ideas, to become equipped and confident, and to not take ourselves too seriously. Sistership will encourage you to read widely, think deeply, and apply faithfully all that you are learning. So, join us for the camaraderie and stay for the fun.
We invited you, Andrew, here today, mainly because you're going to be our teacher. Well, actually, I like to continue the metaphor and call it a coach, but you're going to be our coach for the School Age Sisters Spring Training this year in May. And all of that really started because I heard you interviewed on another podcast, and you were talking about teaching history. And I was really struck by what you said, because I felt like you were offering something that was kind of missing for us as part of a category that we've been working on. So we, as like School Age Sisters, we have an online community, and we have spent the past couple of years really thinking and reading through issues related to things like Marxism, cultural Marxism, critical race theory, all sorts of things in that vein. And it was super helpful. Like a lot of us now, we see more deeply when we're looking at what's going on in our culture. But I feel like what we were missing was what to do. There was a lot of, don't think this way, don't think that way, or identify this problem or that problem. But there wasn't a whole lot of time spent on, do think this way and do these things. I think that might perhaps be even more true for our younger moms. They were most likely, I'm guessing, all raised on Howard Zinn. Misty was homeschooled, so she gets a pass. And I'm old enough that I was in the public school when we were still reading the American pageant. It wasn't all the new history stuff that they're doing. So, I did not, even though I was public schooled, I was not taught history as this power struggle between groups thing. So what we're hoping for spring training is that we begin to get some glimpses of how to think about history, like not just see that most people are thinking about history in a Marxist way, but then how do we think about history in a non-Marxist way? What's the right way to think about it? And what it might be like to teach with methods that correspond to a better way of thinking about history. I don't necessarily want to steal, all the magic of what you're going to teach us in May by getting into too many specifics about how you teach history, but I could tell from your website that you do a lot of seminar style teaching. And I don't actually think a lot of us, even though we've been in classical education, homeschooling for a long time, I don't think a lot of us really are familiar with seminars beyond it being something that a lot of the classical colleges do. We were kind of hoping today that we could focus more on that aspect of your work.
Sure. Yeah.
I've heard of Socratic seminars. I've heard of Straussian seminars. I've heard of Oxford style seminar. I don't even know how those three things are different. So, I mean, I would love I don't know. I feel like this beginning question could even take you the whole episode probably to answer, but I'm just wondering, can you even unwind for us what seminars are and what are you actually doing when you do this? And how does that fit in with the larger classical tradition? I mean, we are coming to this with very little understanding of what you're actually doing when you do these things that you sell online.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I can talk about that, and I can talk about it all day long, but I know that we just have a little bit of time together. I think the first place to start is to recognize that a seminar method, the seminar method is a pedagogy or a set of pedagogies proper to the teaching of classic works of literature, expository and imaginative. And we begin with recognizing there's a major reason why students ought to read, Plato's dialogues, Aristotle's ethics, etc. And that is to ask questions and answer them, to ask questions that are most important to our understanding of what it means to be a human, how to relate to God, how to understand the world around us, how to understand society, political, moral, historical lore, etc. And then the main reason for reading imaginative literature is that we want the students to expand their experience and to be moved the way humans ought to be moved. So we don't just give the students any old novel. We give them novels that suit the dignity of their humanity, give them a vision of greatness, help them to understand how have them look for the details that are packed into a story by which an author crafts the story. And it's in those details, those physical details and psychological and dramatic details, that a student starts to put a novel together. So it's incumbent on the teacher then to lead the student into the books in a way that's most effective. And the seminar method is question-driven, and that is the seminar leader has to ask really good questions about either type of book. When we're reading expository books, we're looking for argument or the analysis or the set of cases that the expositor is laying out for us to understand something, say about politics or religion or ethics or history. In the imaginative literature, we're following Flannery O'Connor, who says that the meaning of a story doesn't lie outside of the story, say in a moral or a lesson or a set of virtues or something like that. It lies in the details packed into the story. It's kind of like when you look at a great painting, it's put together by line, color, positive and negative space, texture, proximity or positioning of subjects, and so forth. And you dwell on the painting and you gather in all the details until the whole comes into clarity. And therein you find the meaning of the painting. And so too with a piece of imaginative work. So the teacher in turn has to ask questions to lead the students into the book. A seminar is a collaborative effort of a group of students with the teacher, everybody having read the assignment ahead of time, to now discuss the assignment. Why? Toward greater clarity, toward greater understanding, toward interpretive insight and command. It's collaborative because, first of all, when any of us reads a book, that is the chief way we meet the mind of the writer. Now, reading is one way we meet the minds of others. Speaking is another. So a really great pedagogy is when a group of careful readers are gathered together to meet the mind of the author and to meet the minds of one another by asking questions, answering questions, debating answers, looking for more evidence, coming around to better clarity, and so forth. So we drive one another, but the principal driver, the principal leader is the teacher, who keeps the students' noses in the text, keeps leading them back into the text. And it becomes very lively. It's lively in no small measure because everyone's participating. It's also lively because it's not linear. It's not like an examination, questions 1 through 50 or something like that. It's not a Q&A session. The teacher will ask a question, and the best kinds of questions are questions that can be answered in multiple plausible ways. The teacher's not asking a question to get the absolute right answer that she wants. Rather, the teacher's asking an interpretive question. So, for example, let's say we're reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The teacher would ask a question like this: why did Edmund betray his siblings in Aslan? And this is a book for young readers, and it's a hard enough question to answer that young readers are going to grapple with it, and they're going to grapple with it under the teacher's leadership by looking for evidence. From the very beginning of the novel, the kids are away from their home and away from their parents, and naturally Susan and Peter kind of assume the older sibling role. Naturally, Lucy's the youngest kid and sort of, low-lying fruit to pick on by Edmund and so forth. We learn, he's resistant to their leadership. He wants to be, sort of a bigger guy in the family. We learn that he's competitive. He gives in easily to the lure of what he called Turkish delight and so forth. And when the opportunity comes to tell the truth about Lucy, he opts out. So there are all sorts of things that indicate what's going on there. But also what's interesting about Edmund and that you say, well, is Edmund only a guy who betrays his siblings? And the kids, no, 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 look, he fought and he actually, and how far did he fight? Like how much was he willing to fight on the side of Aslan? And the kids was well, look, Mr. Zwerneman, he almost died. And if it wasn't for Lucy's special vial, he would have died. So much did he kind of recover. So he not only reconciled by shaking hands with Peter, he laid down his life. And in doing that, he imitated Aslan and he imitated Peter and the others who were willing to go to battle for the right side of things. Or if we take a more complicated story, we ask a question of Hamlet. Said, why didn't Hamlet avenge his father's death? Now, at the end of the 5th act, he finally does kill Claudius, who had murdered the elder Hamlet. But he does it in a kind of a fit moment, a peak of anger, because it's clear that Claudius was responsible for the poisoning, inadvertently, still responsible for the poisoning of Gertrude, young Hamlet's mother. And of course, Claudius is also responsible now for Hamlet's death, because he too has been poisoned with the poisoned tip of the sword. So he kills him at that point. It's not really a revenge. It's not like a moment where he says, all right, the old man is guilty of killing my father. I'm going to exact revenge. So 5 books elapse from the beginning of the first, actually 5 acts elapse after the opening of the first act, where the deceased Hamlet charges his son to avenge his death. And he never does. Why doesn't he do that? Well, that's a $25,000 question, and it takes hours and days of discussion to try to figure out what the motivation of young Hamlet is. It doesn't take hours and days to figure out the motivation of Edmund. But that kind of discussion is proper to young kids. A big seminar discussion, which takes a long time and a lot of effort, is proper to older students. And that's why it's so good for a text like Hamlet. Or you could say the same thing of Homer's Iliad. There's Karamazov, The Crime and Punishment, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Any novel like that or play that is it's a big lift. The seminar method is beautifully suited for that kind of discussion. The word seminar comes from, and I'll just make this last comment, and then I'll stop talking for a bit. The word seminar's root meaning is seed plot. It's an agricultural term, and you know how students will go to a seminary to be trained to be pastors. A seminary is a place where they're trained to take the teachings and practices of the church and then to build the church elsewhere. So in similar fashion, a seminar is a place for students to build up something like a skill set, a body of knowledge, which in turn, radiates out to their studies. And being, secondary school or even college, they've got a quiver of arrows or a body of wisdom or a whole set of references that enables them to see the world more clearly and to relate to humans better and to do their jobs or to exercise their calling with much more humanity, with humaneness. And sometimes we call seminars humane letters seminars because whether we're studying philosophy or fiction, both of them illuminate what it means to be a human. So that's what it is in a nutshell.
This is so interesting to me. I wish I had known about this when I was teaching co-op last year, because I think it would have helped me in leading discussions. I'm not saying I've never asked a question of motivation, why someone did or didn't do something, but I don't know, something about how you described it. I think I better understand its power now that you said that. Are there obviously this wouldn't be the only question that you're asking. Are there other types of questions? So I would call this one the question of motivation. And so you're really getting into the humanity of the characters. Are there other categories of questions that you're asking of the text as kind of like a standard practice?
Oh, sure. So let's go back to works of exposition.
Okay.
Let's say that you were having the students read some modern political writing. And you went to, I'll give you 2 quick examples. You go to the Federalist Papers by Madison, Hamilton, and Jay with the pseudonym Publius. And let's say you go to the 10th book or the 10th paper. And this one was written by Madison. It's all about factions. So you could ask the student, say, the word faction might be the most oft-repeated term in the whole 10th paper. What does he mean by faction? And then so the students rifle through the text and, through several pieces of evidence, any one of them might put together an explanation of faction. And then you could ask, let's say John's the kid who answers. Say, okay, who can expound on what John had to say, or correct him if you think there's something missing. And then, other kids will respond, and we start to assemble or accrue evidence in the 10th Federalist paper about the meaning of faction. And then I said, okay, now let's go another step. Why is he spending so much time on faction? What's its significance? And then one of the students, hopefully, or eventually, will say, well, he says that factions are the biggest threat to Republican government. Republican government being the kind of constitutional regime that the founders were establishing and for which the Federalist Papers were making an apologia. And then, the kid's answer might be sufficient, or we might probe it more. I might probe it, another student might probe it, I might ask the students to probe it, and then we'll move toward a greater clarity of something like the political problem that Madison is trying to solve. So if factions are the biggest threat, then in turn, what's the solution to the problem? And we find out, and eventually the students will arrive at this, that you can't eliminate factions any more than you can eliminate the fallen nature of human beings. But what you can do is you can diminish their impact. And the number one objective is to make sure there's no one dominating faction. Think of tyranny or something like that. Think of all the laws too in our history. They're antitrust laws, like monopoly always brings with it a threat of injustice, because monopolies are too big, and people don't really have the freedom to exercise their right to earn a living or to create a new business and so forth, compete in a market. So factions of that nature, financial or political, cultural, can be highly dangerous to a republic. And so the solution, more or less, that Madison articulates is that we expand the number maximally of factions. So have as many as possible and make them various too. And in that way, you can't get rid of human interests. So let's make sure there are lots of them. And it's okay if they compete, but we don't want anybody competing to the level that would once and for all defeat the rest. So that would be a dominant kind of faction. Or so another kind of question, if you go over to the opening chapter of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's On the Social Contract, which is one of the most important works in modern political theory. Early on in that text, Rousseau makes an argument against a preceding argument that was in the air. One of the most dominant arguments in the modern era in the 16th and 17th centuries was an argument by Thomas Hobbes. And Hobbes had argued that might makes right. That is, politics is really a matter about who's got the power, and it's not really a matter about justice. And so Rousseau counters that. Now, Rousseau, who ends up introducing some pretty problematic concepts and vision into the modern world, actually does a brilliant job unzipping Hobbes's argument that might makes right. So the question is to my students, without telling them that he's going to unzip it, I ask my students, I say, oh, look at this on page such and such. What's the topic here, or what's the problem that Rousseau has identified? And one of the kids will look hard and say, well, it seems like here on the such and such line down the page, he seems to be talking about the position that says, if you got the power, you got the right. Whoever is in power has the right to do whatever. I said, well, what does Rousseau think about that argument? And then we work through the argument, and we might work through it by those kind of questions, or we might work through it what I call by the line method. That is, well, the argument only goes about 3 paragraphs. So I might read or have a student read each line, and then I'll say, okay, what does he mean by that line? Or maybe every third line, say, what does he mean by those previous 3 lines? And what's he arguing? What does he add to his argument? What's the step in his argument? And that's a really good way to get to the argument. So you could ask general questions that get to the argument, or you go line by line by line to work through methodically the argument that's being developed by the writer. Those are all kinds of questions you could ask of expository literature.
That is fascinating to me. I know one person who was educated this way. He's an adult, and he was educated this way in college. And one thing that is very notable about him, I guess I would say, is what a close reader he is. And it never dawned on me. I just thought it was him. I thought he was this way. But now I'm wondering if actually it was how he was educated. Because it feels like he thinks expositionally. And yet somehow he's still able to grasp the whole. Whereas I feel like a lot of people I meet that are good at details, they kind of lose the whole forest for the trees. But I don't know. Anyway, I could see though how answering these questions and working through arguments would train you to be able to handle complicated texts and arguments just whenever you encounter them.
Yeah. I think it's true. I think its seminar method is rigorous, but loads of fun too. So there's kind of a carrot and a stick there. There's like the questions drive it, and everybody has to be really disciplined and keep looking at the text, read it closely. But it's also a lot of fun because we're all doing this together. And there's a lot of freedom, not in a loosey-goose sense, but in the kind of classical sense of a liberal education. There's a lot of freedom to try your hand at an answer. And then if the answer doesn't work so well, there'll be a good reason for why the answer doesn't work well. That is, somebody will say, oh, there's other evidence, or, oh, you haven't provided evidence, or you said one thing, but you said something else that opposes what you said just now. So, and so the conversation is making everybody think sharper and speak sharper and to listen sharper too. Those are all great skills that we're developing as seminar discussants.
It was interesting to me how you handled the word faction, because I think I would have not knowing about this method, I think I would have asked someone to look at that word up in the dictionary. What does a faction mean? And then going from there, but you drove them back to the text, which I find fascinating, but it seems to me like a more effective way to get them to really think about the text. Do you ever use a dictionary? Or, I don't want to say ever, but would you ever incorporate a dictionary into that particular kind of conversation, or would you want to keep it just to the text?
That's a really good question. There are terms that come up in either kind of reading, imaginative or expository, that sometimes the students don't know. And so I always encourage my students to have a dictionary by their side. But there are all sorts of terms that they have some understanding of that are what we call equivocal terms. They have multiple meanings. Take, for example, the word nature. Aristotle means one thing, Hobbes means something radically different. So Aristotle looks at nature both in terms of what's given to us and what the purpose or the end of something is. So, human nature it is not just given to us. Humans are what they are, but it's also the case that we work hard to become better at what we do, to be more virtuous intellectually and morally. And when I say better, that's a form of the word good. And the reason we can improve, the reason we can grow in knowledge, grow in courage, that's one intellectual virtue, one moral virtue, is that the order of reality is fundamentally good. Hobbes, on the other hand, thinks the order of reality is fundamentally not good. That is, he even says there's no summum bonum, there's no ultimate good by which we make decision. There's only a summum malum, an ultimate evil. What's that? Death. We're all afraid to die. And so the world, according to Thomas Hobbes, is that we have guns to each other's head, and it's a matter of, okay, how are we going to get our guns to go down? And he introduces the Leviathan, or kind of a tyrannical king who takes unto himself all arms, all means of power, and says, okay, the only thing you can get out of life is some peace so that you won't die. And I can guarantee that. That's a really tough world to live in. Whereas Aristotle, Plato, Augustine, and Aquinas, I think to a large extent, Publius, all think that the order of reality is fundamentally good. They vary in that. So the founding fathers recognized that people are fallen, but they also believed in the efficacy of religion, education, history, good constitutions, all of which can cultivate in people a better way to be. Whereas Hobbes, the only thing you can't really cultivate goodness, all you can do is avoid death. So, wow, those are wildly different notions of nature.
Yeah.
So I would say, look for the meaning of the word as much as you can. Look for the meaning of the word internal to the text, and the way the author unveils his argument, or the way a fiction writer unveils his story, will help us understand the meaning of the word as intended by the author. Which is also a good reminder that when we're leading seminars, we're not doing a biography. In other words, I never ask this question. I never, ever, ever ask, what is Shakespeare trying to say? Or what is Flannery O'Connor trying to say? Or what is Mark Twain trying to say? Those are all fiction writers, of course, imaginative writers. No, a storyteller tells the story in the form of a story. An expositor tells what he has to say in the form of an exposition. So he really is saying what he has to say. Mm-hmm. So what is Hobbes's argument? What is Locke's argument? What is Publius's argument? Yeah, they state it right up front. But we don't talk about the fiction writer's argument or their intention. Rather, we look at what they've given us, which is a work of art, play, a poem, an epic poem, a novel, a short story.
I was just thinking, based on, I've led literature discussions before, but it is so hard to get kids talking about a text, even a story, because everyone's kind of paralyzed about giving the right answer.
Yes.
And someone having a different answer is a contradiction, and someone has to be wrong. And just finding ways to help kids actually have discussion and dialogue that's not about getting the right answer is very tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky, but it's entirely doable. And I think once the wheels get going, keep them well greased, and it's a great way to learn and a great way to teach students. So one of the things, I'm not shilling for our product, but
go ahead, do it.
we founded Cana Academy. I mean, the number one reason we founded Cana Academy is to give resources for seminar leadership and to train seminar leaders. I mean, that's like something like 90% of what we do is all directed toward that. So if you go to our website, we have hundreds of articles for free on seminar leadership, all things related to seminars. And then we have about 60 guides, more than 60 guides on how to lead particular books in a seminar context. So we have a guide on how to lead a seminar on Homer's Iliad, how to lead a seminar on Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and about 60 others. So that's what we're set up to do. And if you went to the website, www.canaacademy.org, you could look at a free sample of any of the guides. So let's say you just say, what kind of questions, I don't understand, what kind of questions am I supposed to utilize in order to get going on Homer's Odyssey or Dante's Inferno or Macbeth or Robert Bolt's A Man for All Seasons? How do I get started? Well, you can go and read a sample, and you can find some questions that we advise. And the questions are there. We think a teacher worth his or her salt ought to answer the kinds of questions we ask in the guide. And then you can select from the questions by which you lead your seminar discussion. And then at the very end of the guide, there are questions for writing assignments. And they're tied also to our writing guide. But even if you didn't have the writing guide, you were looking for a good writing assignment for the students having just spent X number of days talking about that particular book, well, then the guide will give you some pretty good questions that your students might answer as their final writing assignment.
Is there an ideal size for a seminar group, or is this something that you think I can do at home with just the 2 teenagers that I have left at home?
I think you can pull it off with a small number, but that's not optimal. Okay. I think it's better to mix it, to at least have occasional seminars with other students. So if you can pull in other families and maybe agree to study, a particular book together, and then everybody gather at somebody's house, and then you have maybe at least 6 or 8 students, then you're cooking. That really gets kind of a breadth and a depth to the group that is kind of foundational. I love a dozen students.
Oh, okay.
Any more than 18, it starts to thin out at the edges. Like the participation level really gets pretty thin. But I love something right in between 12 and 15. But I've had great seminars with a half a dozen students, and I've pulled off seminars with 18. And the more students you have, the more energetic the leadership has to be.
Yeah. I only had 1 year where at our co-op when we were back in California, it was about 18 students. I don't remember the exact number. And it was really hard to control that unwieldy animal for sure. It was a bit much. So I don't know if I could handle I don't know. 12 sounds like a better number to me. I do feel like just knowing these questions will help me have better discussions with my kids, but it's good to know kind of what a more ideal size is as I try to think about what we're going to do. And my planning for next year is what I'm thinking of specifically.
One mom came to our website and ordered our guide on Dante's Inferno, not for her kids, but for her circle of moms.
Ooh.
And they got together and I think there were 4 or 5 of them. They got together and they read Dante's Inferno and they used the guide to drive their conversations and to sort of give them some bearings because it's such a different kind of text. And none of them had ever read it, none of them read anything quite like it. Anyway, just throwing that out there, it seems like with such a dynamic and wide and various group as the Scully sisters constitute, there might be a group of sisters out there who want to read one of the books that we have a guide for and utilize in that way.
For sure. I guess another question that I have then is, are there recommended ages for this kind of a thing? And if it's not for all ages, then what would you do with, maybe children that are too young for something like this?
That's a great question. We believe in assigning books to students according to their intellectual, social, spiritual maturity. So, for example, we stand actually in a different spot than a lot of folks in the classical education movement who like to teach everything chronologically, which means, for example, that 8th and 9th graders are getting the Greek plays by Aeschylus and Sophocles, and 12th graders are getting American stuff. We think that actually is not optimal. We think the American literature is actually easier than the Greek literature. It's less spiritually mature than the Greek literature. So it's better to give that material to, say, 11th and 12th graders and give something like 9th graders the American canon, just to give you an example. We think the seminar method is best suited for high schoolers.
Okay.
But we think discussion is a pedagogy that can work all the way down with the grade schoolers. So I gave an example earlier from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Right.
And we have a guide on that, but we wouldn't call it a seminar guide. For one thing, the little ones can't carry discussion for very long, or certainly not as long as the high schoolers. So high schoolers can actually go a couple of hours, really in a rigorous conversation. You might have to give them a little break in there. But we think a good discussion could be driven even among the little ones. So we have a number of guides on books that are suited to what we'd roughly call middle schoolers between 5th and 8th grade. The Chosen by Hanpatach, The Hobbit, Christmas Carol, Shane, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And there's some other ones, the Witch of Blackbird Pond. I know there's some other ones. I just can't think of their names right now. Oh, Watership Down. All those are really great books. Would the discussions rise to what I call the seminar and the kind of rigor that I describe? No, probably not, especially because with the younger students, you're not really leading them through the big lift expository works. So, little ones all the way down to, first, second, third grade, as soon as they can read, they can start reading fiction. They don't really read expositions, philosophy, ethics, theology. They might study the Bible, of course, but, work by one of the church fathers or medieval theologian or something like that, they're not going to engage that. So I would say the seminar method is really best suited to high schoolers.
Is there a name for this? Is this a specific kind of seminar? Or is it just kind of a fusion of different things that you have learned along the way? Like, where did this come from? Where is your genius from?
It's such a great question. Yeah. What are you talking about, Andrew? Within the classical education movement, a lot of people would call it Socratic seminars.
Okay.
And we recognize that we owe a lot to Socrates because he asked questions consistently of a particular nature. They were questions that most of them didn't have a yes or no answer. And they were meant to get the interlocutors to think harder, to examine their souls, to grow in excellence and so forth. But the quality of the question has largely to do with making the students think about something that's difficult and usually doesn't have just one answer. What's a plausible answer? Who determines that? Well, the teacher does. That's why the teacher has to be really well read and really rigorous and disciplined and well trained. Some of the other sources of seminar leadership in America would include, of course, Mortimer Adler. He was a big advocate and practitioner of leading seminars. I'm kind of 2 cheers out of 3 for Mortimer Adler for the following reason. I owe tons to him. In saying that, I don't mean anything irreverent. I owe so much to him. I've read half a dozen of his books, and I've had to buy second copies of a couple of them because I marked them up so much, and I had to start over again. But Adler tended to drive seminar discussions according to big ideas, and gave less credence to the nuts and bolts details that we find in fiction. And in turn, he tended to drive the reading of fiction toward philosophical ends. And maybe Mortimer Adler could pull that off. I think in the hands of a lot of teachers, that ends up kind of failing the integrity of the different genres. My whole team is a big, big protector of the genres and their integrity. So don't treat fiction as philosophy. Don't treat even historical novels as history as such. Don't confuse the genres. And there's a whole school of thought out there that says that the teacher is not really a leader, but more of a facilitator. So you ask a question and you sort of help people get into the conversation, but it's more of a book club conversation and less of a rigorous foray into the text. Why do you need a leader when you do something hard? Well, ask any successful sports team or ask any group of climbers who are trying to make their way up a difficult mountain. They really need a mountain guide. And teachers are a lot like mountain guides and a lot like sport team coaches. They are helping their students achieve what they probably can't achieve on their own. It's an unfortunate turn that a lot of practitioners of Socratic seminar simply wind up with the big question at the beginning of a discussion and then expect the students to carry the discussion for the remainder. We don't believe in that. We believe that leadership extends throughout the entirety of the seminar, which is not to say the teacher's talking all the time or dominating the conversation, but it is to say that the leadership is dynamic, kind of the way in a dynamic sports match the coach is calling plays or making adjustments in the defense, or the mountain guide will call up several hundred meters and say, you need to move to the east to avoid a rock that's overhanging and it's going to be too hard to traverse. So, you got to shift a couple of 100 yards or meters and things like that. The mountain guide cannot climb the mountain for the climber. And the student's role can't be replaced by the teacher, so it's not like the teacher's the only learner in the room or the only speaker in the room or something like that. And it's certainly not the case that the teacher is the expert and the didactic instructor in a seminar. He's a seminar leader. It's a different pedagogy than didactic instruction. But it is the case that the teacher needs to lead well. And sometimes, especially with younger students, it's a matter of you don't just ask questions, but sometimes you have to coach the students. So you get a kid, for example, who gets an idea in his head, and you let him take it down the rabbit hole. You might not ever be able to pull it up because
So true.
Kids get attached to their well-voiced and what they think is highly developed position. You don't call a really an unfortunate position out of its place early on, that the kid might not be able to pull back from it. And you coach little things like the grammar and or if a student says something and doesn't give evidence, you say, well, what's the evidence for that? Or, the student flings an ad hominem and, okay, no ad hominems, let's argue with logic, reason. Okay, if we're animated, but we're not going to go after each other personally. We're all trying to learn and we're all trying to grow in our understanding. So if you have a question or a point, make it without personal attack, make it with reference to the text.
I just had to laugh because I've taught Plutarch for years, and I just had this one student for a year who wanted to bring everything back to World War II, no matter what. And it was just, apparently she had grandparents that were, I don't know, in a concentration camp. It was a very interesting story, but somehow it came up in every Plutarch. That was the rabbit hole that I was continually pulling this little girl out of. Everything somehow related to her grandparents in World War II. And I just really wanted her to be with the Greeks and the Romans.
That's so funny.
Oh, kids are so funny how they fixate on certain ideas or happenings.
Yep, they sure are.
Oh, I love it
That's
though.
part of the fun of teaching.
It really is.
Yeah, I love it too.
Well, and I learned more about World War II than I would ever have known otherwise.
Well, there you go.
I don't think I really told her that she taught me things about World War II, but technically she did. So, uh, a lot of our listeners are very interested in the big picture of classical education in terms of the goal of classical education being things like the development of virtue. How do you see this approach tying into that larger goal?
The first thing about education is that we are training the minds of the students. And so we want our students to be intellectually excellent. The seminar method is terrific at that because it helps them to make arguments, to read closely, to discuss intelligently, to write more clearly. These are all excellences of the mind. And the supporting skill set, to listen and to respond and to persuade. These are all wonderful habits of the mind. I draw a distinction between growing morally and growing intellectually. That's not my distinction. That's as ancient as, say the scriptures and Greek philosophy. But if we follow Aristotle, one grows in the realm of morality by doing morally good things time and time again until they're habitual, which, among other things, means that we don't grow in the moral virtues by our studies. We grow in the intellectual virtues. We grow in moral virtues like courage by doing courageous things time and time and time again. Now, are there some moral benefits to hard work? Yeah, almost by definition, right? So you have to endure, you have to be diligent, you have to be disciplined, and you have to be docile. You have to be willing to learn from your teacher. You have to be willing to learn from your fellow students. And docility is a good thing. But the big gun moral virtues that I think a lot of people everyone is rightly interested in fostering among their children and their students are really things that are taught more by parenting, by pastoring, and so forth. So that's both in the language of morality, we talk about what one ought to do, right? You could also say in the language of intellectual virtue, what one ought to know. Are there, in culture, which teachers are keepers of, is a collection of what we know, what we love, what we ought to do, and so forth. And culture is also a collection of the fine arts. In a classical education, we train the students to look at paintings, listen to music, watch drama, and so forth with great attention and with great feeling too. We all know that there are works of art that do violence to our sensibilities, and we go, whoa, wait, we're not going to introduce that to our students. And we know that there's, kitsch, and there are other kinds of banal forms of art that kind of flatten their spirits. What we want are artworks that are going to make the students see more of life. Violence to the human body, that doesn't make us see more, that makes us see less, actually. Or something banal certainly makes us see less. But we want the students to attend to the details of a painting or a sculpture or a work of music until they experience what the artist has conveyed in that work of art. And so it allows us to recreate it. So if we look at an example, if we look at, say, the Pieta by Michelangelo or the Tragedy by Picasso, either one of those, there's some kind of sorrow that's happened, some kind of human loss that's happened that's conveyed in either artwork. And by the arrangement of marble in the one hand or the arrangement of color, line, subject matter, etc., Picasso has conveyed the sorrow, the mourning, the sadness of the people in the painting. If you look at the marble that Michelangelo uses, in and of itself, the color of the marble, I wouldn't call it sober or sorrowful. But if you look at the colors of the Picasso painting, the Tragedy, it's all blue. And it very much works toward the effect that he's achieved, and that is to move us toward his subject matter. And we move toward the man and the woman and the little boy in the picture sympathetically because of the arrangement of the painting. And should we? I think so. I think that's exactly how we ought to feel. We ought to feel the mournfulness or the tragic experience of the three. We don't know what happened, but we want to know what happened, and we want them to be delivered of whatever their sorrow is. We would love to do something. In that painting, the back of the mother is to us both the mother and the father have their heads down and their arms folded across their chests. And the little boy lifts one hand and just barely touches his father's pants and his leg. And it doesn't seem to do much for the father. And he lifts up his other hand and toward his mother, and it doesn't seem to do much for his mother. But you can see that they're all poor. The boy's got raggedy edges to the ends of his pants. He's got no shoes on. They're by the sea. They're clearly very poor and very, very cold. And they're mourning something, maybe the loss of life, or maybe something else has happened. But we feel the little boy trying to do something, and we'd love to do something ourselves. And Picasso has achieved that. Just like we are sorrowful with Mary as she holds the body, the corpse of her beloved son on her lap. Mm-hmm. We can't do anything about it in either case, but we want to. And we are, why? Because we're moved in sympathy toward the suffering of the subjects in either work of art. Should we feel that kind of thing? Of course we should. Mm-hmm. Just like when our students listen to, say, The Marriage of Figaro, and they come to the great reconciliation scene at the end. Should they be moved by the reconciliation? I think so. They listen to a beautiful aria, say by Vivaldi, or by another great composer, and moved by the suffering of a female character in one of those arias. Should they be moved? Yeah, I think so. They should also be moved with delight at a funny penny opera by Gilbert and Sullivan. They should be moved by the quirkiness of Tom Sawyer. He's getting ready for Sunday school, and his cousin's trying to get him, all gussied up for Sunday school, and he's resisting. We should laugh at that. We should also be moved by how tender and sturdy and patient his cousin is. Her name is Mary, I believe, and we should laugh at him when he's doing all the funny things that he does as a boy when he sees Becky Thatcher in the crowd there at Sunday school. And then we laugh at him when he gives a very poor answer. They want to hear him, well, what do you know about the Bible? And so he's asked, name two of Christ's disciples. And he gets all nervous, and all he can say, he blurts out, David and Goliath, It's just the whole chapter and the whole Sunday school scene ends in calamity. And that's funny. But we are not left unsympathetic toward Tom, because he finally wins Becky's hand. I think it's 2 chapters later. He's in school sitting next to her, and he gives her a peach, and that doesn't work. And I can't remember if he offers her something else. But finally, he draws pictures, and this catches her attention. So the artist in Tom gets the girl. Later on. He's a mix, right? He fights, he's deceptive, he's mischievous, he's naughty, disobedient. He's also heroic, and he cares about. He even cares about Injun Joe, who's a very violent and scary guy. But the idea that he's left back in the cave alarms Tom. So anyway, I love all that about novels and works of art and music. They move us the way we ought to be moved, but we don't say, what's the moral lesson of the Pieta?
Right.
That would reduce the Pieta to something kitschy or moralistic. And great paintings, great operas, great stories and novels and poems are great because they move us in very powerful ways. But they don't teach didactically what it means to be moral. They teach by way of sympathies and by sensual imagery and sensual sound. So you see, you hear. Even in a poem like, say, Out, Out by Robert Frost, it's got that great line where he describes the table saw. He says, the buzz saw snarled, right? So the buzz saw sounds like what a saw is, and then that it snarls. Well, that sounds ominous, doesn't it? And in fact, what happens in the poem is the poor boy cuts his hand and he bleeds out and dies. So there is something ominous about that. We take that in as readers of the poem sensually, not didactically. There's not a moral lesson, and yet we are moved the way we ought to be moved by the boy, by his sister, by the whole circumstance.
I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your answer. I feel like within homeschooling, at least, or at least people that I have met, there's a one-dimensional view of virtue, and there's kind of a dismissal of the idea of intellectual virtues sometimes, and how that is development in virtue as children are developing in those intellectual virtues. Like virtue isn't just moral in nature, or at least not specifically moral. But then on the other hand, just this idea that your morality is developed in a much more nuanced way than through like didactic teaching or something. Actually, I don't think it's developed by didactic teaching much at all. But I appreciate the breadth of your answer, because I've seen some homeschoolers reject the idea of virtue as a goal because they feel like that is the area that belongs to God. And who am I to, I respect the reason for it. Who am I to step in the place of God and say that I can affect a child in this way? But what you're really pointing to is how God uses means. And so anyway, I appreciate that so much.
God uses all of us as teachers, as parents, as coaches. And, if our kids are on a sports team and we go to a game and we realize the coach hasn't taught the players the skills of the game, we have every right as parents to say, something's off about this. So we go to the athletic director and say, the kids are not learning how to pass and dribble and shoot. It's just a mess out there. And so can you get the coach to teach them the basic skills? And or if you go to the doctor and you find out the doctor really doesn't know much about medicine, we'd all be appalled, right? So we need doctors with intellectual excellence in the field of medicine, or engineers who build, bridges that don't collapse and all that kind of stuff. So
right. Well, Mystie, do you have any final questions? We've taken up so much of his time.
Yeah, no, this is great. I'm really looking forward to spring training and applying some of these ideas to just positively teaching history as an interesting subject that we can discuss and not just, derive all the necessary facts from.
Yeah.
Or talking points.
I'm looking forward to it too. And I got the charge to do 2 presentations.
Yes.
As I think it was Brandy was introducing the whole episode today. You were talking about a different way to think about history. So I have a different way to think about history. I call it the liberal approach to history, where liberal is known classically, as in a liberal education.
Oh, I love it.
And then I go to the nuts and bolts of teaching history in the second session. And so the 2 of them will be related to each other. But anyway, that's something, a little preview, what's coming up.
I can't wait.
Excellent.
And I appreciate you doing this for homeschool moms, just the vote of confidence that, we can learn how to do these things. Even though a lot of us went to public school, we can still learn how to do this.
Yeah. I went to public school too. And it was not a good school, not for the humanities anyway. And I had one really great humanities teacher. He was my speech and drama teacher. He was a veteran of the Chosin Reservoir Battle, which is one of the most storied battles in Marine Corps history, tough as nails. And I was actually really shy as a kid, and my dad made me take speech class with Mr. Robert L. Gaines, U.S. Marine Corps retired. And that guy was a master sergeant, and he was tough, but he trained me to think. He taught me to organize my thought, to articulate a thesis or a main point, to support it with good argumentation, supports, and to present myself in front of an audience. That was huge. It was a big life changer. I was going to say something about homeschoolers. One thing to be encouraged by is that there's a deep tradition of homeschooling in America. In the colonial era, there were no schools. Everybody was homeschooled. You learned how to read, you learned how to do basic math, and then you learned all the skills necessary to a self-sufficient farm. And then on Sunday, everybody went to church, and you learned all about the Bible, and you learned all the things that Sunday school taught you, and then the community that was gathered there. That's how people were educated and cultivated a lot of learned Americans and a great sense of purpose and a great sense of community. So homeschooling's got a lot to speak for itself. Everybody stand up a little taller today, perhaps.
Well, thank you for your encouragement. We will.
We should close out with the national anthem.
That's right. That's right. Well, we really appreciate your time, and we look forward to spring training so much.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm very grateful for the time today that you invited me to spend with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's
been a joy. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. Please make sure you are following us in your favorite podcast player so that you don't miss our upcoming episodes. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with a friend and then discuss it with her. This is a great way to continue the conversation. All of the books and things we mentioned today are linked in our show notes. Just go to scolasisters.com/SS138 to check it out. Don't forget to register for Andrew's spring training sessions on teaching history classically. He is truly a master teacher and you are going to love this training. If you are a Sophie member of the Sistership, these sessions are already included for you free of charge. If you are not a Sophie member, head on over to scolasisters.com/history and register. That's scolasisters.com/history. Our next episode is one we are super excited about. Misty and I had a nice long chat with Andy Patton, the new president of New College Franklin. If you want the inside scoop on classical colleges, this episode is for you. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon you needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters. Misty, am I asking too many of the questions?